I'm about to start working on my first personal project of the pattern making course that I'm taking. If you're interested in the course, feel free to check out the link down below. In the second video of this series, I made my basic bodice block as well as my basic sleeve block. And then in the third video of this series, I took those blocks and I made a button-up pattern out of it. After toweling and doing fit adjustments, I took those fit adjustments and I applied them back to my basic block. Now that I have it updated, I'm going to use it to create my first personal project. My plan is to design a classic chore coat that has different elements to elevate the style. Most of the pieces in my closet that reflect my personal style well, I would consider elevated basics, which essentially means taking a classic garment and adding some design elements that make it more elevated. For example, that would be something like new seam lines or a different silhouette. I'll insert a picture of a design I made from the past, which for me is an elevated version of a classic long sleeve. I changed the silhouette of the sleeve so that it's poofier and has a cinch at the wrist. I also made a deep plunging V that has big ties at the front. They can be tied up like a bow or just in a knot that hangs freely. So I'm going to bring this same idea to a chore coat and change some of the design elements and seam lines so that it's a more elevated version of a chore coat. I'm really excited to brainstorm some of those ideas with you, but first I'm going to hop back into the course. Victoria recommended that I jump ahead and do a specific module on dart manipulation before I start this personal project. Okay, so in this module, I'm taking my basic bodice block and I'm learning how to manipulate the darts so I can change them to any portion of the bodice. For example, I could take the dart that's at the sleeve and move it down to the waist, or I could take the dart that's at the sleeve and move it to the side seam. There are also more complex versions of dart manipulation, and honestly, the sky is the limit. There are so many cool ways to manipulate darts and make seam lines that are significantly more elevated than the classic ones that you'll see. I'm going to insert some examples for you so that you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. I've personally done dart manipulations before on paper, but I've never done it in Illustrator, so I'm excited to see how it translates. I'm going to get going on that module now, and I'll be back in just a bit.
Trace down the dart leg there. What we want to do before we do anything else, however, is we want to mark an alignment point at the top of the bust dart, or rather the waist dart. So I'm going to move in here with my line tool and I'm going to create a little notch that's 1/2 centimeter long.
So I just finished up the dart manipulation exercise and I sent it in to Victoria for review. And then once she's reviewed it, I'll be ready to start drafting my chore coat in Illustrator. In the meantime, let's chat about the details that I want to add to this coat. So for the chore coat, I want there to be a decent amount of ease in the pattern pieces. That means that it's not going to be a fitted garment, but instead there's going to be some space between you and the garment. That way it'll be super easy to wear on a day-to-day basis and you'll have full range of motion everywhere in the garment. I also would like to have a drop shoulder, which I would say is pretty classic for a chore coat. And then a few major things that I'd like to change from a traditional chore coat is going to be the pocket situation as well as some of the seam lines. So what I'm envisioning for the pockets is the ability to be able to have a top-down compartment as well as a side-to-side compartment. That way, for example, if you dropped your phone into the pocket, you could also put your hand in the side of the pocket and they're two separate compartments. The reason that I don't want to do just a top-down pocket is because I really like being able to put my hands inside of my pockets, and putting them in this way isn't as comfortable as putting them in from the side. So I still need to conceptualize how I'm going to construct the pocket, but I think it's going to work out really well for the function that I would like out of the pocket. And then for the seam lines, I want to add some seam lines that aren't traditional. This will hopefully just bring a point of visual interest to the coat. So for example, rather than having a seam at the bottom of the sleeve, I'm hoping to switch it around so that the seam actually is from the center top all the way down. It should start at the shoulder seam and basically run all the way down the arm. I'd also like a seam down the center back panel. So rather than making a pattern piece that would be cut on the fold for the back bodice, I'm going to make one pattern piece that you cut two pieces out of. There's going to be seam allowance down the middle, and then the two pieces will be joined by a seam. Then the last thing that I'd like to do is add a seam all the way around the bodice. The idea is that I'll split the top half of the bodice and the bottom half of the bodice so that the bottom half is about 1/4 of the size of the top half. Then all of those seam lines are going to have a double top stitch all the way around. I think that it's going to look really cool and I'm super excited for this pattern to come to life. Now I'm going to go grab the fabric that I picked out so you can kind of see what I'm envisioning. So a few weeks ago, I went to one of my local-ish stores. It's not super close, it's like maybe a 1/2 hour drive, but it's close enough to go if I need something specific. And what I was looking for when I went was some selvage denim so I could make another pair of Helene jeans. I found some really, really beautiful jet black denim with no stretch in it. It had a beautiful selvage, and it was so inexpensive that I decided to buy 5 yards of it. Unfortunately though, when I brought it home, I decided to wash it, and I washed all 5 yards together, which wasn't the right choice. If you've ever washed denim before and you've watched too much, you know what I'm talking about. So essentially it was this gorgeous jet black fabric. Then I threw it through the wash, and I think what happened was that it didn't get fully soaked with water. And then when I put it in the dryer, it solidified like all of these crease marks in it that was created from washing too much fabric at one time. Let me show you what I mean. So here's the fabric, and like I said, it was jet black before, but now it's got all these like kind of washed marks all over it. It's definitely not jet black anymore, and that's what I really, really wanted for the Helene jeans. So anyways, it's not a huge loss because like I said, this fabric wasn't super expensive. So what I decided is I'm gonna use this fabric as toiling fabric, and I'm gonna use it as my first toile after I've made a muslin of my chore coat. I'm envisioning using some of this really nice selvage edge instead of doing a serged seam. So for example, I want a center back seam down the bodice, but instead of serging the seam, I think it would be really cool to use that selvage edge and then press it open and do a white top stitching thread. That way it'll look super beautiful and crisp from the outside, and it'll also look amazing from the inside. I also think that doing a double row of top stitching on top of all of the seams in a contrasting stitch is gonna look beautiful. So that's kind of what I have in mind for the first rendition, and then I have the final fabric for once I'm ready to cut into it. I ended up at my local Joann's the other day and I found some fabric in the 70% off section that was literally perfect. It's exactly what I've been looking for this specific coat, and I cannot believe I found it at such a discounted rate. What I wanted was something between a medium and a heavyweight twill that has a super soft texture. That way it'll be more comfortable on my body than a traditional denim jacket. So I present to you the most beautiful, bone-colored, soft and supple twill you've ever seen. And you girl bought 5 yards of it. I wish you could see and feel it in real life because it's just so nice. I'm very, very excited to work with this and I can't wait to cut into it. But with that being said, I really don't want to cut into it unless this pattern is perfected. Because if it's not perfect, I'm going to be so sad if I cut this fabric and it doesn't end up working out. So anyways, those are the 2 fabrics that I'm going to be using, and I think they're going to be perfect. Now at this point, I've reached out to Victoria in the Discord group, so I'm waiting for feedback on the dart manipulation, and then she's going to basically help guide me since this is my first personal project. Once I have some official guidance from Victoria, I'm going to get started on the pattern. We're going to have a group call in the morning, so I'm hoping that we can chat about my chore coat in it, and then I can get started from there.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Excited to talk about the chore coat.
Yeah, so did you understand what I meant about changing the changing the way the dart was rotating?
Yeah.
So let's say 5 centimeters here. So that means we're bringing this down 5 centimeters, and I literally just mean this.
Is it possible to have no sleeve seam so that the front and the back are all connected? But that changes the grain line. So.
It's possible, it's totally possible. The problem with that is that you're not going to be able to grade it very far before it doesn't fit on fabric.
Oh. Even if it was split in half, because I do want a center back seam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That call went really well, and Victoria and I got to talk about how I'm going to change my basic bodice block into a chore coat. I had a handful of questions going into the call, and all of them were answered, so I have a really good understanding of the direction that I need to go in. If I run into any bumps along the way, I'm just going to reach out to Victoria in the Discord group. She's really good about getting back to us in a timely manner, so I'm not concerned about that at all. So I'm basically going to be taking my basic bodice block. I'm going to add ease to the places that I want to add ease. I'm going to extend the shoulder and drop the shoulder down, so I have a drop shoulder. I'll need to be thinking about details like the button placket and how I want to do the collar. And then one thing that my brain is still a little curious about is how I want to construct the pocket. I'm pretty positive that I know how I want the pattern pieces to look, so I'm just gonna have to figure out the construction. I think I'm just gonna cut out some muslin and I'm gonna scale it down so that the pieces are smaller. That way I can figure out how I want the pocket to be constructed. I'm just having a hard time visualizing what seams are gonna be sewn first so that there's a compartment coming from the front and a compartment coming from the side. But other than the pocket pieces, I'm feeling really comfortable about the direction that this is going. I'm also pretty excited to play around with the sleeve because the idea that I had was rather than having the seam down here, I would make the seam up here. So if you could visualize a traditional sleeve pattern piece, I would essentially cut it down the middle and then I would mirror it backwards. So it would kind of slope like this, and then these 2 side pieces would actually be where the seam joins here. My only worry with this is that the grain line is going to change from where it usually is. So I asked Victoria about this and she said that she thinks it's going to work fine. The only worry that she has is if someone tries to use like a plaid material or a striped material, because that would just really hurt your brain the way that it's going to line up. I am going to draft a traditional sleeve as well as this new sleeve concept, and I'll kind of compare them just to make sure that there's no weird pulling because the grain line is different. One other thing thing that I asked Victoria about is if it's possible to omit this side seam because the seams are going to be straight anyways, so in theory you wouldn't have to cut out two different pieces. So she said that it would technically work, but she did worry that once you get into the larger size ranges, the pattern piece isn't going to actually fit on the width of the fabric. However, with that being said, the back panel is going to have a seam down the center, so that is a consideration. The pattern piece isn't going to be super wide, but with that being said, you would have to unfold the fabric, and I know that a lot of people like to cut the fabric on the fold, so I think I'm going to play around with that and have multiple different options on Illustrator and then figure out what's going to work the best with a full size range. The only reason why I really want to omit the shoulder seam is because I think that from a style perspective it would look really cool. It's relatively not traditional to not have a shoulder seam, and it's also relatively not traditional to change where the seam is on the sleeve. And I think that visually it would make a big impact in a very subtle way. But with that being said, I do want this pattern to be accessible for a full size range, so I'm just gonna have to tinker with it and make sure that it's gonna work the way that I want it to work. If that means changing some of the style lines, I'm not worried about it. It's okay to have a shoulder seam, it's just a concept that I had in my mind. So with all that being said, I've got a lot of work to do. I'm very excited to dive into this, so I'm gonna hop over to Illustrator and just start tinkering around. I was feeling a little bored of working at my desk all the time, so I decided to move over to the couch where it's a little bit cozier and get some work done over here. So I think I've gotten to a pretty solid stopping point. I essentially just drafted all of the front bodice as well as all of the back bodice, and then I attempted to do the sleeve and I did it to the best of my ability, but I wasn't quite sure how to apply some of the things that Victoria said in the group call yesterday. So I'm going to send over what I've done so far to Victoria, and then we're going to chat about it on today's group call. My thought is that once I finish the front panels, the back panels, and the sleeves, that'll give me a good starting point to make a muslin, and then I can just draw all over the muslin and kind of decide where the style lines are going to be. So essentially right now I'm just working on the skeleton of the garment, and then once the skeleton is perfected, then I can add all those extra details that I'm excited about. So anyways, it's about time for today's group call, so I'm going to go back to my sewing studio and take the call from there.
Hi everybody. Seems like a few more people are joining us. So yeah, how's it going, Jessica?
Good. I worked long and hard yesterday to get done what I got done, and figured I just did my best and we could chat about it, so I'm excited.
Yeah, totally. So I'll pull up the file real quick because I just want to kind of like orient.
Okay, so I just chatted with Victoria about my chore coat and we went over some changes that need to be made. Overall, the front and the back bodice went really well. There are some small adjustments that I need to change, like making the neckline a little bit lower, and that was kind of it. Yeah, I basically just need to change the shape of the neckline. Other than that, I'm going to fix up the sleeve. She kind of showed me really quickly how I need to change the sleeve so that the sleeve head is lower. That way that it like fits into the sleeve cap better. Yeah, the changes are not that extreme. They should be really easy for me to implement. So I'm going to go ahead and make the new sleeve. I'm going to adjust the collar opening area, and then I'm going to send those into Victoria in the Discord. And while I'm waiting for feedback on that to make sure that we're good to go from there, I'm going to draft a collar and potentially draft facings. I'm still kind of deciding if I want to make a facing or not, but I'm kind of leaning towards not doing a full facing on the inside around like the collar and the front button placket. I think I'm just going to have the button placket fold over and then not do a facing around the neckline. I'll just attach the collar straight on. Yeah, but anyways, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then once that's all good to go and has gotten the okay from Victoria, it's time to cut out a muslin. So I'm really excited about that. I'm gonna get to it and I will see you when we're ready to cut out muslin. So I realized that you guys might actually want to see what it looks like for me to work on Illustrator. So this is a sped up version of me adjusting the sleeve. What's actually happening here is I'm doing a full bicep adjustment and I'm bringing the top of the sleeve head down while making sure that the rest of the sleeve cap stays the same length. It's pretty interesting in my opinion to see what these adjustments look like on Illustrator versus if you were to just do them on paper. I think that ultimately working in Illustrator is significantly more accurate and it's also a lot faster than working on paper. I've been loving the whole process of learning how to pattern draft on Illustrator, and if you don't know how but you're interested, I would highly recommend checking out Victoria's class. At this point I've only been in it for like 4 weeks now, but I've learned so much. I'm super grateful to be taking this course and really thankful to Victoria for gifting it to me. And now that all my adjustments are done, it is time to print. Hello! So it is pretty late in the day, but I just printed out my pattern and I'm excited to get tiling. I don't think I'm gonna do any sewing right now. I might cut fabric, we'll see how I'm feeling, but for sure I'm about to tile it right now and then I'll cut out the pattern. It shouldn't take too long, but I definitely want to do that tonight, so when I wake up I'm setting myself up for success and I'll just be really excited to sew my first muslin of this short coat. So yeah, I'm gonna get into tiling. I used to be really intimidated by tiling together patterns, and that's solely because I thought it would take forever. And while it can be time consuming, I chatted with Victoria about her recommendations on how to piece together patterns, and she says that she just folds the pieces of paper and tapes them together. Previously, I was cutting off all of the edges before taping them together, and that is definitely time consuming. This fold over method isn't perfect for storage, but it is a really good way to piece together patterns quickly. I figure that since I'm piecing together so many patterns for this course, it's probably better if I just do the fast method rather than doing the one that takes a lot of time but's better for storage. Most of these patterns don't need to be stored anyways, since I'm basically just in the process of perfecting the pattern, and then I think once I've perfected the pattern and I'm ready to print out the whole version, I'll probably just get it printed out from PDF plotting, or I'll take the time to tile it together and cut off all the edges. Now after I finished tiling together all my pieces, I called it quits for the day. The next day was actually my birthday, so I treated myself to a matcha and a cookie at my favorite local coffee shop. Then I went home and I got straight to cutting up my muslin. I'm so glad that I set myself up so that I just had to sew on my birthday, rather than having to worry about tiling together the whole pattern. Overall, sewing the garment went really well. It was really fast considering the fact that it was just a toile and I didn't need to serge any of the edges. It probably only took about an hour, which was perfect because I did have other things planned for the day since it was my birthday. Now, if you want to see how this muslin turned out and ultimately see how the entire chore coat pattern came together, make sure to subscribe so that you can follow along on the journey. Next week's video is all about the fit adjustments to the toile, making a wearable muslin, and perfecting this pattern. So don't forget to stick around if you want to see that, and I will see you in the next one.